Second Corinthians. Where? Okay. No, yeah, he left Ephesus, but you're getting warm, buddy. He left Ephesus and went up to Troas and didn't find Titus. So then he went over, Robin, where? Okay, yeah, I think you're right. Probably Philippi, which was in the larger district of, starts with an M. Macedonia. Okay, so here is our map that we want to go back to. If I can get the switch into the on position. Here we go. All right, so here we are. Of course, all three journeys begin at Antioch. But on the third journey, Paul had left Antioch and comes over to Ephesus. And he stays there. Let me back up. He writes Galatians and then he writes 1 Corinthians. And he was real concerned about how they took the 1 Corinthian letter. And yet in Acts 19, he said there were many, in 1 Corinthians 16, Paul says there were many adversaries in Ephesus. And in Acts 19, we learned that what was going on was, who was that silversmith? Demetrius was causing all kinds of problems. So he left Ephesus, went to Troas. He hoped to find, come right in, ladies, we understand difficulties, and I did get your text, Wayne, so thank you. He hopes to find Titus in Troas, but doesn't, so he left and went to where? We named it just a moment ago. Up in Macedonia. And he said he had no rest till Titus came, and then Titus did come. And he said, Paul, things are going better. The man who had his father's wife has repented. However, there are other problems. Some are doubting their apostleship. So what happened from that, Paul writes 2 Corinthians that we're studying now. And the major sections, we want to remember, there are three major sections. The first deals with his defense of his ministry, the defense of the gospel he preached, the glorious nature of it, the hardships he had endured. All of this is actually, though it's like I've told several, I made a point here. The older I get, the more I feel or understand that God is accomplishing several things with just kind of a sweep of instructions. For instance, he's talking about the glorious nature of the ministry and what he had undergone in order to preach it. But that tells us a lot about the gospel. The Old Testament came with glory, the New with more glory. However, that is also in anticipation of his defense of his own apostleship. And so he points out later on about the hardships, chapter 11 primarily, the hardships he had suffered in order to preach the gospel. And all of those things were evidence of the transparency of his life. So all of that has come down to where we are now with the collection for the saints in 8 and 9, the encouragement to give based on the Macedonians' example, and the purpose of the messengers, and the reasons to give liberally that we came to in chapter 9. We finished 8 last week. Some of you couldn't be with us. But we finished 8, and we're ready to start 9. I will just say a few things about 8. We're not going to read all this, but the Macedonians example, let's just glance at some of the highlights. In 2 Corinthians 8, now Macedonia is up where Thessalonica, Berea, Philippi are. And so he says, I make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches of Macedonia. They were giving. And they become a tremendous example how that in much proof of affliction, the abundance of their joy, their deep poverty, abounded to the riches of their liberality. So he's thankful for the goodness of the Macedonians, which would have included, of course, as we mentioned, Thessalonica, Philippi, Berea. And so he gives them an example. By the way, what does he call what they're actually doing? It's a five-letter word. It's mentioned in verse 1, 4. Grace. Yeah, this grace that's given. Down in verse 4, in regard to this grace. Down in verse 6. Insomuch that we exhorted Titus, that as he had made a beginning before, so he would also complete in you this grace also. It wasn't necessarily the grace, the benefit that the people in Jerusalem were receiving. It was the grace that God would give a giver. The grace given to the giver. It's more blessed to what? To give than to receive. Acts 20. And so the grace is actually on the part of those who are giving. We think, well, the grace is the one who are receiving all this help. Well, it was financially, but that's not the point Paul makes. The point is that all this benefit is coming to you who are giving. And so he gives reasons why that's so. So he exhorts to continue in this grace, and it's based on the fact that they had confidence in how the funds were handled. You'll notice in chapter 8, verse 16 through the end, who is mentioned specifically who is going with them in this matter of the bounty? Titus. All right. Then you'll notice there's a second brother, verse 18. We have sent together with him the brother whose praise in the gospel is spread throughout all the churches. Now, do we know who that is? No, we really don't. We mentioned last week, some think it may have been Luke. If Silas and Luke was with Silas and Timothy, and if Luke, whose reputation is spread in the gospel, that some indicate, well, that might have been the very fact that he'd written the Gospel of Luke, and it could have a reference to that. Whatever the case is, he's unnamed, but he was well known among the churches. There's a third brother. Look down in verse 22. And we have sent with them, that would be Titus, and the brother whose praise in the gospel is spread throughout all churches. We have sent with them our brother, whom we have many times proved earnest in many things, but now much more earnest by reason of the great confidence which he hath in you. So you've got three people. Titus is the only one named, and then the brother whose praise is in the gospel, and then this third brother he mentions that we've proved earnest in many things, and more now so in this matter of grace and the giving for the saints in Jerusalem. So three people. And it's interesting, we pointed this out too last week. You'll notice in verse 19, let's pick up the reading in 19. Not only so, but who was also appointed by the churches to travel with us in the matter of this grace, which is ministered by us to the glory of the Lord, show our readiness, avoiding this. In other words, we've had these fellows picked out, chosen by the churches. They're going in this with a lot of money in their hands, so to speak, avoiding this, that anyone should blame us in the matter of this bounty, which is, in other words, people could have said, well, Paul's just doing all this for whom? Himself. He's just wanting his money for himself. And Paul says, no, there's a system of checks and balances. Everybody knows what's going on. There's a transparency. And then look at verse 21. For we take thought for things honorable not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. The Lord knows, but we want men to know that, in other words, we're not going to do anything that even looks suspicious. So there was protection for Paul, protection for other people, that everything is transparent. Several people are working on this in conjunction, and so it takes it out of the realm of speculation. Well, I think he's doing it for nefarious reasons, or he's just after your money. Well, they couldn't say that because it's all open and above board. We had long conversations last week about, I say long, there was some just conversations, illustrations about dealing with the treasury in various churches and making sure everything is above board, and financial statements are posted, and everybody, you see, and quite frankly, when you know what's been given, it encourages you to do what? To do even more, because you see, it's almost like there's no side roads. It's going straight. You know where it's going, how much is given. you know where it's going out, and so there's a you can have confidence, and I think that's the point Paul makes, that you can have confidence to give and to complete what you began about a year ago, he says, and continue on that. So that's where we ended last week. Comment, question on anybody's part? Anyone, feel free. Read anything. All right, so we're going to go on to pass it here, to chapter 9. Here we go, right here. Okay, so Paul knew the Corinthians had been eager to engage in this effort for the needy in Jerusalem for at least a year. In fact, you'll notice in chapter 9, verse 2, I glory on your behalf to them of Macedonia that Achaia has been prepared for how long? A year past. Then look back chapter 8, verse 10. He says you started this about what? About a year ago. So twice he mentions that you've been doing this about a year. So he mentioned that. And then he said to use the zeal to stir up the Macedonians from where he wrote the letter. He said, in other words, I'm writing to you down here in Greece or Achaia, Corinth, and I've been bragging on you. I have just been telling all these people in Macedonia that, remember, that's where he was when he wrote, possibly at Philippi, and whereas the Philippians, the Bereans, those in Thessalonica had helped Paul in Corinth, now he's bragging on those at Corinth to those back in Macedonia. And he says, oh, I've just been telling people up here that for a year you've been gathering it all up, and I'm just so happy with you. And then he comes back around in just a few verses and says, now I want to make sure that you're doing exactly what you promised you would do, that I not be embarrassed, much less you would be embarrassed when we come and the collection is not there. So to ensure that all is in readiness and that his boasting to the Macedonians might not be hollow, he sent ahead brethren that no one would be embarrassed if they were unprepared. He would also allow for their true generosity rather than offering something grudgingly. That's the first 5 verses. To encourage them to give liberally, Paul next uses the general agricultural principle of sowing and reaping, how the same is true in giving. All things being equal, the size of the harvest is directly proportional to the amount of seed sown. Little sowing guarantees a small harvest. Likewise, bountiful sowing ensures a bountiful harvest. Purposeful, deliberate, cheerful giving, not reluctant or compelled giving, will bring a bountiful harvest. Further, God has the ability to give the giver everything he needs, enabling him to do more, even in other good works. And then at the end of the chapter, Paul mentions the effects of such giving. Not only will it supply needy saints in Jerusalem, but it also abounds in thanksgiving and praise to God and the prayers on the part of the recipients for the givers. Those ideas combine to bring thanksgiving to God who makes all of this possible. All right. Comment or question before we take off now?
I've got a question. Can you think of it any time where people gave other than money to the church, like maybe what they had, something? You can't know.
I guess I understand the question.
Yeah.
I don't know of any offhand. I think in Acts 5, there was Acts 4, Barnabas had a certain field.
Yeah.
And then Ananias and Sapphira had a possession. Then it's identified as a field. I don't know of anything.
The reason I asked that is because someone had said that there's no example of giving other than money.
Yeah.
And I felt like right after the church was established, where it talks about they had all things in common. Of course, that wouldn't be saying to the church necessarily,
right,
but individuals maybe. And I got wondering about that because some people might not have had money, but they gave what they had.
Yes, I think so. Or some things were sold.
Yeah.
I've known of occasions where, and this happened when we were in Athens, someone, it may have happened a number of times here, and I'm just unaware of it, but an older couple willed their house to the church. And so the house was, I think, administered by the elders, that is in the selling of it, and then the funds were just funneled into the treasury. you would probably, in order to send funds, at a distance like they were, it would have to be turned probably into some form of money.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, this person, just said, well, there's no example of it, and that it was wrong to do
Yeah.
what the person had done, and I disagreed, and I was just wondering about that.
Mhm, yeah.
But I agree,
I-
they'd have to turn it into money
Yeah,
at
you
some
have
point.
to turn it into money eventually to do more. Unless here's a person who, and this has happened all in our area, where a person buys or has property in his family and he just gives the property to the church to build a building on. That happened right here from Brother Lewis. He actually bought the lot, I think in 1952, and had some tent meetings, and then the church was established and gave the church a lot. And that happened all around in our area. I think the church up where the Plowers were was donated, and then they have a cemetery out, back. And so a lot of that has been done. Yeah, I think it's been done. Okay, so good question. Using the Corinthians as examples, they should finish what they began. Let's start reading there. Lottie, if you would. Chapter 9, 2 Corinthians 1 through 5.
Well, it is a purpose for me to write to you about this ministry to the saints. For I know your readiness, of which I boast about you to the Macedonians, namely that Achaia has been prepared since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. But I have sent the brethren that our boasting, about you may not be made empty in this case, that as I was saying, you may be prepared, lest if any Macedonian come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to speak of you, should be put to shame by this confidence. So I thought it necessary to urge the brethren that they would go on ahead to you and arrange beforehand your previously promised bountiful gift, that the same might be ready as a bountiful gift, and not affected by covetousness.
What was the last word you said, Red?
Not affected by covetousness.
Covetousness, yes. Some translations have the word extortion or grudgingly given, the NIV says. All right, so I think especially most of us in here teach. And I think especially if you could read this passage with a map, and of course I've gone past my map, and just say, okay, up here in the north, you remember Macedonia, Paul is up here as he's writing. Down here in Greece is where the Corinthians are. And you could say, now, I'm up here, but I have been bragging to my brethren up here about what's been going on down here, down here in Greece. If you could show young people that idea that here he is, but he's writing to these people, keep that in mind. And they have, for a year, they've been collecting it, but he doesn't want them to lag. And so he's telling them, you go ahead and you make up what you've promised, and you continue to do that. You've been going at it a year. And in verse 3, I've sent the brethren that our glorying on your behalf may not be made void. That even as I said, you may be prepared, lest by any means, if there come with me any of Macedonia, that is some of the brethren from Thessalonica or Berea or Philippi. Can you imagine maybe the jailer from Philippi goes with Paul, and he's been hearing that he's never been down there to Corinth. And he's been hearing Paul say, oh, I tell you what, Mr. Jailer, those fellows have just been giving all they're doing so well, and in their afflictions that they've been going, they're still doing so well. And so, well, I'm anxious to see them, the jailer says to Paul. And so Paul now has been building this up. When he gets down there, he doesn't want to see them lagging and lackadaisical. But that make him ashamed. But the ones who would be most ashamed would be who? The Corinthians down there. So he says, I'm telling you in advance, make sure you've done. Have y'all ever been done that? I mean, I know I have. I have bragged on some young people thinking that they were doing pretty well, and then they disappoint you. And you know what it ends up making you not want to do? Brag on people. you just don't want to commend too many people, because you think they're going to come through and then they let you down. And so it's a disappointment. And this would have been a disappointment for Paul. So in verse 5, I thought it necessary therefore to entreat the brethren that they would go before unto you and make up beforehand your afore-promised bounty, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty and not of extortion or compulsion. That is, we're not just kind of ripping it out of your hands. You don't want to give it, but we're making you give it so you won't feel so embarrassed. So that's the idea, I think. All right, we've got, let me see, number 3. I know we're not going to our little workbook much, but on page 60, at the bottom, very bottom of page 60, number 3, chapter 9 indicates the purpose of messengers and reasons to give liberally. Why did Paul send messengers ahead of himself? What's the answer? Anybody want to share with us?
That they be ready.
That they'd be ready, right, Sister Roz? They would be prepared and keep from being embarrassed. That's exactly right. Yes. Okay, so any comment or question on these passages? All right, if not, then we're going to move right on and look at these verses 6 through 11. Encouragement to give based on the agricultural principle of sowing and reaping. These are the passages I think most of us have heard quoted pretty much all of our lives. Let's just read 6 through 11 here. Martha, if you would, 6 through 11 of chapter 9.
For this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposed in his heart, so let him give not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that he always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. As it is written, he has despaired abhorred, and he has given to the poor, his righteousness remaineth forever. Now he that ministers seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sower, and increase the fruit of your righteousness, being enriched in everything to all the bountifulness which causes through us thanksgiving to God.
Okay, all right, good. Thank you, Sister Martha. Notice in 6 through down to about 9, he deals with the instructions to them. These are things you need to do. And then in 10 through 12, he basically says, now as you do this, what's the other side of the equation? Who's under discussion in 10, 11, and 12? All right, make 10 and 11 at least. It's not us, but it's...
Those that are doing the giving.
No, that's 6 through 10.
That's us.
It's God.
It's
It's
God.
God. God is able to do that. So look, he who sows sparingly will reap also sparingly. That is, if you just are very stingy with the seeds you sow in a field, then there's not going to be much of a crop, much of a harvest. He will reap sparingly. But if he sows bountifully, just more than enough, as it were, he will reap also bountifully. And so that is the agricultural principle. Well, here's the application. Let each man do or give according as he's proposed or purposed in his heart. So that tells that there is a purpose behind it. We might say a plan. I'm planning, I'm budgeting, to do this.
Sorry.
Not grudgingly. That is, it pains me to do this. Or of necessity, I guess I'll have to. For God loves the cheerful giver. I'm not giving because I feel like I just have to. I want to. I made a comment here at Pleasant Road. If we have the attitude that, I'm giving this, but I wish I could do more, and I plan to do more when I have opportunity. That's what God loves. And so let each one for God, and the motive is because God loves what?
A cheerful.
A cheerful giver. Yeah, God wants us to be this way. And quite frankly, though he doesn't say it here, when we give and try to give more than what we might even be able, but we give and we want to give more, we're actually following whose example? God. James 1:17, every good and every perfect gift cometh down from above, from the Father of lights. So God has given us and given it and for, and then he goes on to kind of detail some of that in the very last of the chapter. But that's the point that he makes. We'll come back to that hopefully in a moment.
Brother,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question on that. Okay, so God loves the cheerful giver.
Right.
So he's saying that we're supposed to have a good attitude about it.
That's right. Yeah.
If you have a
Happy
bad,
to give.
yes, exactly.
Mhm.
If you have a bad attitude about it, well, you're capping a person, giving a person, or even on Sundays for the collection, if you have a bad attitude about it and you don't want to give, would you say that it's best not to give it?
Well, good question.
Yeah.
You're doing right. You know, let me back up. There are a lot of things we do that it's not just the action that has to be right, it's the motive behind the action. And sometimes our motives can improve. I remember talking to several people about this idea that sometimes a person can do right, but his motives are maybe somewhat doubtful. Even preaching. There's some people who preach for the wrong reasons. And yet, the motives can say, you know, I've been doing this for the wrong reason. There's value to this. Or maybe giving. You know, well, I didn't really, I felt like I had to do it because people expected me to give. But then as he says, well, look at all the good it's doing. And the motives can change. So I guess I wouldn't say it's better not to give at all. I'd keep giving and then hopefully let my mind catch up with my actions. Let my heart catch up with my actions. Soul Hall had a lesson years ago that Lee and I heard that has been, and it was kind of, and I've kind of taken some of the same ideas. It's on the song that we used to sing in sacred selections, Don't Let Your Light Burn Low. And the lesson was along this line, that oftentimes we can become discouraged, we don't feel like going to services, we don't feel like doing a number of things, but we keep on doing it. We do it anyway. And he made the point that sometimes our light can burn a little lower, but when we keep going through the motions and we keep trying to do what's right, sometimes our heart will catch back up with our actions. Our actions and our motives, our heart ought to be at the same point, but sometimes they're not. And so what we want to do is let our heart catch back up with what we've been doing that's right anyway. That's why some people say, I just feel like I've not been doing other things right, so I'll just quit coming to services. You all have heard that? No, they need to keep coming and then let their mind and their other things catch up with it. So two wrongs don't ever make a right. Yeah, and I hope that's helpful. Janet, you look like you want to say something.
It was, I was thinking too, when we on vacation, if we don't leave our money before we go, then we should make up for the time we was away from the worship. Because the church still has to go on, bills have to be paid.
I'm glad you said that. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
No, I think you're right. My dad used to make the point that, you know, we go off on vacation and lo and behold, we still get a power bill, a water bill, and all these bills that come into the house. And then, but we weren't here. Well, you still have the service, you know. And it's just common sense, really. It's common sense. Okay. Is everything okay?
Vanessa's been sick since last Saturday, and her head's just been killing her, and she's been to the doctor, said she didn't have the flu, you know, all this kind of stuff, and she said, she said her head is particularly killing her now.
Yeah,
And
so-
I said, we'll just go back to the doctor
Yeah.
and find out, because our daughter-in-law, who's in our age, she kind of thinks maybe she might have meningitis because she's having such severe headaches. So,
Okay.
where I
So
said,
we'll
we'll
pray
just,
things-
we'll
we'll
just
pray
go
things
back and find it and get tested again.
Very good. Thank you, Linda. Thank you. We'll pray things go well.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, so, I think all those ideas are correct. And you know, it all goes back to the idea of being a cheerful giver. If you're cheerful, you're not grudgingly or giving of necessity, it's not like, hey, it's kind of like everything else in the religion of Jesus Christ. Love for the Lord and love for our brethren, true, I'm talking about genuine Bible love, prompts everything that's right. You know, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. If I really want what I really love the Lord with all my heart, then I'm not going to buck up on, would I have to come on Wednesday night? Should I have to do this? No, love for the Lord would demand that I would do that, and I'd want to do that. And love for my brethren would make me behave toward them in such a way that would not be questionable. And you want their best, what's in their best interest. And so all of those things really are taken care of, for God loves a cheerful giver. Just about. Now, the next verse is interesting. As I mentioned, 6, 7, and 8 deal primarily with our responsibilities. And then it's almost as if it shifts gears. And 9, 10, 11, he deals with what God is able to provide you in order to do this. As it's written, he's scattered abroad and he's given to the poor. His righteousness abides forever. And then he makes the point from that God is able to do what when we give? Verse 10.
Supply.
Multiply. The more we give, the more we're able to give. The more we do, the more we're able to do. He's able to supply seed for sowing and increase the fruits of your righteousness. Ye being enriched in everything into the liberality which works through the thanksgiving to God. Here's a principle, guys, that I think all of us know, and it has a lot of tentacles that spread out. And I think all of you will know where I'm coming from. Here's a person at work in an office, and you've got some people, younger people maybe, who are not all that interested in work. And here you've got a couple of people, and they're eager beavers. You know, they're looking to do what they can. They do it well. They finish their task. Well, is there something else? Can I sweep the floor? Can I do something else? Usually, if it's a small company, somebody who sees that is going to do what? Not only give them a promotion, but what? Give them what, Robin?
Money, recognition.
Money, recognition, and sometimes even more responsibilities, perhaps that spread out. When our son was about 11, 12 years old, one of the elders where we were offered for him to do some yards. He cut 2 or 3 widows' yards. And it was not members, they were not members of Shepherd, but just older women. And he cut their grass. Well, he wanted to get out of it, and he thought Wes might want to do that. Well, Wes did. And of course, I provided the lawnmower. But you know who got involved in that job? It was me. And people would see us. I bought a little utility trailer, you know, and so we were doing work. And then we edge and trim, weed eat, you know, make it look as good as we blow it all off. And by the way, you know what would happen? Somebody would stop on the street and say, hey, I've got a yard and that I can't get, you know, my husband's been sick. Could you come up and do ours? And it didn't take us hardly any time. We were doing 12 yards. 12 yards, and they just back and forth, get a bigger trailer. And I had to start making time because Wes couldn't drive. And so you make things look good, you put, and then word of mouth gets out, and so your opportunities increase based on the fact that you're doing what you're supposed to do. There are other things. You know, here I've been aware of this too, in places where we've been. People find out about what you're doing in the world, even, and they see, well, you know, he's doing good over in this country, or money is being sent for this, and then all of a sudden you get a check for $1,000 made out to the church from a neighbor because they hear of good that's being done, and it's like, it's just like it mushrooms. The good that is being able to do from, you see more coming in from places you never thought. I've told young people sometimes also this, that when you're going for a job interview, so much is just online now, as y'all know. You interview, I mean, everything's online, even the Google Meet and interviews can be online. But if you're real young, say a teenager, your physical presence says so much. You go to a grocery store, you go to a hardware store, you go somewhere and say, here's my application. I actually did this online, but I'd just like to meet you and say, I'm really interested in this work. Your physical presence says a lot. And a lot of young people haven't learned that. They think, well, I do everything online. When you exert the effort to go someplace and you talk with people and you present yourself in a good way, that goes a long way. And it will multiply your opportunities. It multiplies. I found a quote here that I want to share with you. This is from Lipscomb. This is in verse 8, where he says, God is able to make all grace abound, that you having always all sufficiency in may abound unto every good work. And you can continue to do this. This as clearly teaches as any passage in the Old Testament that God bestows temporal blessings under the new dispensation as well as spiritual, and that He does it in response to a free and hearty consecration to the Lord on our part. All grace here is favor in temporal good, that the Christian having all sufficiency may abound unto every good work. And he goes on to say, in these things it may be asked, does God violate His laws to bless His children? No, I do not believe God violates His laws to do anything. But His laws are multiform and far-reaching. One law acting alone might produce one result. Another law working in harmony with it would greatly modify that result. A law working without prayer or a life of consecration on our part might produce one result, acting in harmony with the influence growing out of prayer and self-sacrifice to God, and that result is greatly modified. The prayer and consecration is so harmonized with all the laws of God that the working of every law bears blessing to him who prays and consecrates himself to God. I just thought that was an excellent comment. And it basically is what we're saying here, that the laws that God put that make up our nature, how we react to things, as I mentioned, when people say, hey, I appreciate the good that's being done, I think I'm going to give. And you have good that comes into you to do even more good that you've never even thought about. Providentially can God work in all these areas to make all these things occur. And then one other thing that I want to do. You'll notice in verse 9, he states what he does relative to God able to supply our needs and allow us to increase in our giving based on this passage that he quotes in verse 9. He hath scattered abroad, he hath given to the poor, his righteousness abides forever. Now, your marginal readings, where's that from? Psalm 112. Good. Let's turn to Psalm 112. Let's all turn to there. This is one of those passages. Actually, every time we see a New Testament writer quoting an Old Testament passage, it's always wise to go back and read the context around that setting, because oftentimes the context will illuminate the New Testament passage that is being used. Verse 1 is the key. Praise ye Jehovah. Blessed is the man that fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commandments. Now think about that before you look at anything else. He fears the Lord, who he is, but then what is his attitude toward the Lord? You thinking with me, aren't you, Roz?
Yeah. I was glad when he
said unto me, let's go into the house of the Lord.
Yes, I'm glad, or in the language of Paul in 2 Corinthians 9, God loves a cheerful giver. I'm glad to do his will. That's the idea. All right, starting then in verse 2, he begins to enumerate some of the effects of this fear and delight in doing God's will. That his seed shall be mighty upon the earth, generation of the upright shall be blessed, wealth and riches are in his house, his righteousness endures forever. Now that will be repeated a little later. Unto the upright there arises light and darkness. He's gracious, merciful, righteous. Well is it with the man that deals graciously and lends. He shall maintain his cause in judgment. In other words, he's benevolent to others. For he shall never be moved. Verse 6. The righteous shall be had in everlasting remembrance. He shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. His heart is established. He shall not be afraid until he see his desire upon his adversaries. Now, verse 9 is what Paul quotes. He has dispersed. What does your translation say in verse 9?
Given freely.
He's given freely. He hath given to the needy. His righteousness what? Endures forever. His horn shall be exalted with honor. And then the last verse is just the opposite. The wicked shall see it and be grieved. He shall gnash with his teeth, melt away. The desire of the wicked shall perish. Those, we would say, those who are not like that. They're not going to have. So, all of these temporal blessings, he says, and that doesn't mean that everybody who's trying to do the Lord's will are going to be billionaires, but it's a general statement of truth that we'll have plenty, we'll have, but the spiritual aspects of it, he deals graciously, he lends, he's going to be stable, verse 6, he shall never be moved, and people will remember us for what's right. Notice, the righteous shall be had in everlasting remembrance. So there's several Psalms about that. And all of us here know people who've meant so much to us in the past that we tell even younger people, maybe our children or grandchildren. Let me tell you about this lady who taught a Bible class when I was young. Or let me tell you about this, and they have no clue, but they know the name. I remember my granddaddy talking about names of people in Middle Tennessee. Well, they died when he was young. But they had such an influence that, and it's just like it continues on, but it continues on especially with, not with us, but with whom? With God and his remembrance. So, I've got a note on that, right here. The American Standard on Psalm 112 says, subtitled, Prosperity of Him Who Fears the Lord. And the second thing in the verse 1 is, who delights in his commandments. He has a respect and reverence for the Lord, and he knows that the Lord's commandments are for his good, and he is as happy to carry them out. That is the context. And that's the context Paul uses in 2 Corinthians 9, that this is for everybody's good, and God will bless you. Keep that thought in mind, and the whole psalm can be related to the way Paul uses it in 2 Corinthians 9. It describes a man who fears the Lord, delights in his commandments. He distributes freely from the wealth and riches in his house, and as a result, his righteousness endures forever. Used 2 times in that one psalm. It endures forever because the Lord continually replenishes his ability to help and also remembers him in judgment. But does it make sense? Isn't that a neat use of that passage? So he supplies seed to the sower and bread for food. And then verse 11, ye being enriched in everything unto all liberality, which works through us thanksgiving to God. All of this actually redounds to the very fact that God is behind all of this. God is behind how all of this works out for the good of everyone. Comment or question, anybody? All right, let's read on 12 through the end here. Sister Eleanor, if you would.
For the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgiving unto God. While by the experiment of this ministration they glorify God
for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal distribution unto them and unto all men, and by their prayer for you, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you. Thanks be unto God for his unspeakable gift.
Yeah, isn't that a need? He's talking about the need to give for these, give to take care of the needs, but the thanksgiving ultimately goes back to God, who's arranged to make all the growth. The older I get, and I use this in prayers often, that I'm thankful for the arrangements God has made in the gospel. And that's not just necessarily one thing, but it's everything that is designed to help us get to heaven, to help us carry on life in human relationships and work relationships, but primarily to help us have a right relation with him and be with him in heaven, avoid hell. That everything is designed. You think Galatians 6 verse 1, brethren, if any man among you be overtaken in any trespass, ye who are spiritual, what? Restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ, verses 1 and 2. And so here's the idea that here, if we see a brother overtaken, we need to do it. But I'm looking at all of that works together for my eternal good. All of those arrangements are coming together on the first day of the week, the Lord's Supper, the singing, all these things work together in conjunction to help us come to heaven. So in the latter part, 12 through 15, he talks about the effects of such giving, which ultimately he says thanksgiving to God. I mentioned this, that a lot of brethren have used verse 13, and let's pause and go back to verse 13. He says, seeing that through the proving of you by this ministration, they glorify God for the obedience of your confession unto the gospel of Christ, and for the liberality of your contribution unto them and unto all. All. The word all is applied in some translations, but some of our institutional brethren have taken that and they've said, okay, they're giving it to these Christians, and then the word and unto all, that would refer to non-Christians. And so hence from this passage, some of our liberal brethren in the 50s and 60s would extrapolate the idea that we can send money to orphans' homes and provide for non-Christians. That's kind of where they went from that. Well, it's an attempt to justify benevolence for non-Christians from the treasury of the church. However, from all other passages, the contribution was intended for saints. That's mentioned in chapters 8 and 9. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1. Everyone in this audience could quote that. Now concerning the collection for the saints on the first day of the week and so on. It was intended, however, from other passages, contribution was intended to be for saints and primarily for those in Jerusalem. Furthermore, the word men is in italics, and so I said all, the word men is and some translations render it simply unto them and unto all. Also, the word all is limited to the context, to the them and to the saints. And so what evidently Paul is saying is that the Corinthian church had been liberal in their benevolence to other Christians besides those in Jerusalem. To them would be Jerusalem, to all would be other Christians who were perhaps in need. But he certainly doesn't, he's not talking about just taking money from the church treasury and giving it to whatever in the city that people ask you to give. That is not what he's talking about. And yet some have tried to make that what he is talking about. All right. Question or two. Let's see. Down at the top of page 61. To encourage the Corinthians to give liberally, Paul uses a general agricultural principle of what? But we went over that. What's that, Lottie? Sowing and reaping. You sow sparingly. I couldn't think of the word. Thank you, Janet. Sparingly, you'll reap. Sparingly. You sow bountifully, you'll reap bountifully. That's right. Okay. So we answered the questions. I mentioned last week, some of you weren't here, this is actually a lesson that Brother Gardner Hall, Bill and Sewell's dad, had in a little booklet that I have. And how Paul, and he just uses chapters 8 and 9. And I thought it makes a tremendous summary as well as a good sermon. How Paul encouraged giving. We give to follow the example of other good churches. When you look back, whose example did he use? The churches up there in Macedonia, where he was when he wrote. And he's using them to encourage the Corinthians to finish up their giving. We give to round out our spiritual lives. Look at verse 7. As ye abound in everything, in faith, utterance, knowledge, and in all earnestness, and your love to us, those are wonderful things. If they see that you abound in this grace also. In other words, you want to be well-rounded in all you do, not just, he sings in services, and he goes visits these people, he gives that, but we need to give also. To prove the sincerity of our love. Verse 8, you notice, I speak not by way of commandment, but as proving through the earnestness of others, the sincerity also of your love. To fulfill a previous promise. Now, they did it earlier, didn't they? A year ago, they started. And what we, in essence, did when we became a Christian, we said, I'm going to do whatever the Lord wants me to do in every circumstance. And then we already talked about this. Give because of our confidence in the way that the funds are handled. We give because of our reputation. That's in the chapter we just covered. If we give so bountifully, we may reap bountifully. And we give cheerfully for God to love us, and give recognizing God's ability to increase our power to do good. Does that make sense? I had a lesson that I gave here sometime a year or so ago. I talked about in Jeremiah 6, seek the old paths wherein is the good way. And I started on that, but then went to the contribution and giving. And much is said about it. Jesus, remember with the widow who gave how much? 2 mites. He knew what she gave. And he said she has given all, even her living. Yeah. He knows what is in our checkbook and how it's used. He knows all about that. What's that called in accounting terms? Discretionary funds. He knows all of that. Several passages teach that the New Testament church had a treasury, but few teach on how we are to give. These passages, primary understanding is from these passages here, and numbers contributed. These are the basic passages, 1 Corinthians 16, and then the passages in 2 Corinthians 9 that we just mentioned. Upon the first day of the week, it's free, it's fixed, every first day. Each one of you, individualized. So nobody can give for me. And I think that's good for young people. Even if they don't make anything, maybe give them $1 or so. Let them get used to the idea, I'm giving myself. And lay by him in store. Give storage is the idea behind, it's the word thesaurus, a treasury. As he may prosper, it's proportionate. It represents what I've made. That no collections be made when I come. That is, Paul would have to go about getting it all from everybody that it would already be prepared. And then he that soweth sparingly shall reap. There's a bountiful, generous giving. Has he purposed in his heart? There's planned, purposeful, making prearrangements for this. We don't get caught offhand. We really look at how much we make, and we're going to go ahead and set this all aside. I don't know if any of you do this. I didn't used to do this, but I have for a number of years. I'll go ahead and make out my checks at the very beginning of the month based on what I made the previous month. And I'll go ahead and just date them for the dates of the first day of the week. Yeah, I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying what has helped me. And so you go ahead and you base everything off of a plan that you have that you want to give so much, and so much of what you made. And so you go ahead and write the checks, you can subtract it in your checkbook, you know how much you have left, and then that way, it's all designated. It's not like, well, you know, I really wanted to buy this $2,000, and then you, no, this reflects what I made last month. And so I'm going to base it on that. I'm just telling you how I do business. I don't say you have to, I'm just saying some kind of plan that you have helps, I think, for budgetary purposes. Not grudgingly or necessity or reluctantly is the idea, but God loves a cheerful or by necessity, external, imposing, some duty bound is all we get out of it. But God loves a cheerful giver. I'm happy, I'm joyous, glad I can give, wish I could do more. I think those passages, they help me. What about 110? Tithing. I had this chart, somebody gave me this chart one time. How much are we actually giving? If we look at our annual income and that divided down into 52 would be this much. And if we gave 20%, this is what it would be on a weekly basis, or 15 or 12 or 10 or 7 or 5. What was that? What was that like?
No.
Oh, okay, I thought I heard somebody's voice. Practical considerations, I think it would be helpful to teach our children, our grandchildren, and show by example that giving of our means is an important part of our worship that we plan for. It's not, I made a point here at Pleasant Grove before, not like the fellow who was helping at the table and the Lord's Supper had been observed, and so the giving was next, and it was almost like it caught him off guard, and in front of everybody. He got his wallet out and started looking through it right in front of everybody. And there's not much purpose behind that. Plan or budget or giving, taking priority. Round up your math. I think that's the idea. Well, 10% is here. Well, what if I'm giving, let's just round this, $52.95. Could I give 50? Could I round it up to 55? Just round it up, if I could do a little bit more. Remember that the offering represents something we're telling God. Who am I referencing in Acts 5? There you go. Ananias and Sapphira. We can pray silent prayers individually as contribution is taken each Lord's Day. Somebody asked me about that. What can I do while we contribute? Well, you can have a silent prayer, a lot of things. Okay, that's what I had on all that. It's actually ending up at a good time. Any questions? Yes, ma'am, Sister Ellen, did you have? Yeah, Janet.
I was just thinking that some people, because I'd seen a comment about this earlier, get their priorities backwards, that they think about the blessings to them, especially financial, before they commit to God.
Yes.
And some preachers, not Christians, like Joel Osteen and those people preach that you're going to be generously blessed.
In advance.
In advance.
If you give now.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of, I've already been blessed.
Yeah, and it's so long.
Yes. The health and wealth gospel.
Mm-hmm.
That you need to commit your life to the Lord, and when you do, He's going to bless you with all these things. That's the motive.
Mm-hmm.
That's the motive.
I heard somebody say, though, that they were defending him, saying, well, he's not really claiming to preach the gospel. Well, he really is.
Yeah, he is. He really
But
claims
he's
it.
not.
He's not, but he claims it. That's exactly right. Anyone else? Well, I thoroughly enjoyed being with you this morning, and this is a good place to stop. Lord willing, let's take off next week. It's Thanksgiving, and then come back on, I believe it would be the 4th. December 4th would be Thursday. And we'll have a couple, maybe 3 weeks, and then take off a couple for Christmas, New Year's. And